I need to tell you about the Christmas of 1997, when I was 14 years old. My parents had gone to a company party that night, December 23rd, and they wouldn't be back until after midnight. I was old enough to stay home alone by then, and honestly, I preferred it. Our house was a 2-story colonial in suburban Pennsylvania, the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, where people left their doors unlocked and kids played in the street until dark. It was snowing that night, not heavily, just enough to make everything quiet. I remember sitting in the living room around 8 o'clock, watching TV with all the Christmas lights on. We had this massive tree in the corner, covered in those big colored bulbs that got hot if you left them on too long. The house smelled like pine and cinnamon from the candles my mom had been burning all week. Everything felt normal, safe. Around 8:30, I heard our phone ring in the kitchen. I got up to answer it, expecting it to be my mom checking in. But when I picked up, there was just silence on the other end. Not dead silence, though. I could hear something. Breathing, maybe, or just the faint sound of an open line. I said hello twice, then hung up. It bothered me more than it should have. We had caller ID, one of those new boxes that showed the number, and when I checked it, it just said, private number. I went back to the living room and tried to forget about it. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time I let it ring 4 times before I answered. Same thing. Silence, that faint background noise, then nothing. I hung up faster this time. My stomach felt tight, and I realized how quiet the house was. The TV was on, but it felt like the sound wasn't reaching me anymore. I turned up the volume and sat back down, pulling my knees to my chest. The third call came at 9-0-7. I know because I looked at the clock before I answered. This time, when I picked up, I heard a voice. It was muffled, like someone talking through fabric, but it was definitely a man. He said, "Are you alone?" I didn't answer. I just stood there, gripping the phone, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. He said it again, slower this time. "Are you alone right now?" I slammed the phone down and backed away from it. My hands were shaking. I thought about calling my parents, but I didn't know the number to the party, and this was before cell phones were common. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? Someone called and asked if I was alone? They'd think I was being dramatic. I went back to the living room, but I couldn't sit still anymore. I started pacing, checking the front door to make sure it was locked, checking the back door, checking the windows. Everything was secure. I told myself I was being paranoid. But then I heard something upstairs. It was faint, just a soft creak, like someone stepping on the floorboards in the hallway. Our house was old, and it made noise all the time, but this felt different. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, staring up into the darkness of the second floor. My parents' room was up there, and my room, and the guest room we never used. I called out, "Hello?" Nothing. I waited, listening, and then I heard it again. Another creak, closer to the top of the stairs this time. I should have left the house right then. I should have run to a neighbor's and called the police. But I didn't. I convinced myself it was nothing, that I was scaring myself over a stupid prank call. I turned on every light on the first floor and sat back down on the couch, but I couldn't focus on the TV anymore. I kept glancing at the stairs, at the dark hallway above. At 9:43, I heard the creak again, and this time it was followed by another sound, a door closing. Softly, carefully, like someone trying not to be heard. I stood up, my whole body locked with fear, and I stared at the top of the stairs. I knew, in that moment, that someone was in the house. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The operator answered, and I whispered that someone was in my house, that I was alone, that I needed help. She told me to stay calm, to get out of the house if I could, that officers were on the way. I hung up and moved toward the front door, But before I could reach it, I heard footsteps upstairs. Not creaks this time, footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, moving from the hallway toward the stairs. I ran. I unlocked the front door and bolted outside into the snow, barefoot, without a coat. And I didn't stop running until I reached my neighbor's house 3 doors down. I pounded on their door, screaming, and Mr. Carver opened it and pulled me inside. He called the police again, while his wife wrapped me in a blanket, and within 5 minutes, 2 patrol cars were parked in front of my house. The officers went inside with their guns drawn. They searched every room, every closet, the attic, the basement. They didn't find anyone, but they found something in the guest room upstairs. The window was open. Not broken, just unlocked and pushed up about 6 inches. There were wet footprints on the carpet, leading from the window to the door, then down the hallway toward the stairs. The prints stopped halfway down, like whoever it was had realized I was calling the police and climbed back out the window. The officers checked outside and found marks in the snow beneath the window, footprints leading across the backyard and into the woods behind our house. They followed them for a while, but lost the trail. When my parents got home, my mom was hysterical, and my dad was furious. The police filed a report, but they never found out who it was. There were no more calls, no more signs of anyone. But here's the part that still keeps me up at night. A week later, after Christmas, I was cleaning my room, and I found something under my bed, a small, folded piece of paper. I opened it, and written in pencil, in handwriting I didn't recognize, it said, "Next time, answer the door." I never told my parents. I don't know why. Maybe because I was scared they wouldn't believe me, or maybe because I didn't want to believe it myself. But I kept that note for years, hidden in a book, until I finally threw it away when I moved out for college. I still don't know who was in my house that night. I don't know how long they'd been there before I noticed, or how many times they'd been there before. And I don't know what they meant by next time. The second story happened to my older cousin, Rachel, during Christmas break in 2003. She was 19, home from college for the holidays, and she taken a part-time job at a shopping mall about 20 minutes from her parents' house. She worked at one of those generic clothing stores, the kind that played loud music and smelled like perfume. Her shifts usually ended around 9 or 9:30, and the mall closed at 10 during the week. She told me this story years later, and I could see in her eyes that she was still shaken by it. Rachel said it started a few days before Christmas. She noticed a man in the store. He wasn't shopping, just standing near the entrance, looking at his phone. She didn't think much of it at first. People did that all the time, waiting for someone or killing time. But when she glanced up a few minutes later, he was still there, and now he was watching her. Not in an obvious way, but she could feel his eyes on her. She busied herself folding shirts, and when she looked again, he was gone. The next night, he was back. Same spot, same posture, just standing there. This time, Rachel noticed details. He was probably in his 40s, average height, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. Nothing about him stood out, which somehow made it worse. She mentioned it to her coworker, a girl named Stephanie, who said she'd seen him too. He'd been hanging around for the past week, always during Rachel's shifts. Stephanie suggested telling their manager, but Rachel brushed it off. She didn't want to seem paranoid. On December 22nd, Rachel closed the store by herself. Stephanie had called in sick, and the manager had left early, so Rachel was alone from 8 o'clock until closing. The mall was nearly empty by 9, just a few stragglers finishing their shopping. Rachel was in the back room, counting the register, when she heard the security gate being pulled down. She froze. The gate was automatic, controlled by a button near the front counter, and she hadn't pressed it. She walked out into the store and saw the gate was halfway down, the metal slats blocking the entrance. And standing just outside, staring at her through the gaps, was the man. Rachel's heart dropped. She shouted at him to leave, her voice shaking, and she moved toward the gate to pull it back up. But he didn't move. He just stood there, his face expressionless, his hands in his pockets. Rachel didn't pull the gate up. She backed away, fumbled for her phone, and called mall security. They arrived within a few minutes, and by then, the man was gone. The security guard checked the cameras and saw him walking out through the main entrance, but they couldn't identify him. He hadn't done anything illegal, just stood there. Rachel finished closing the store with the guard standing nearby, and she left through the employee exit, her keys clutched between her fingers. Her car was parked in the back lot, which was poorly lit and mostly empty at that hour. She walked fast, her breath fogging in the cold December air, and she kept glancing over her shoulder. When she reached her car, she unlocked it and got in as quickly as she could, locking the doors immediately. She started the engine, and that's when she saw him. He was standing at the edge of the parking lot, about 50 feet away, just watching her. Rachel didn't hesitate. She threw the car into reverse and sped out of the lot, her tires squealing on the icy pavement. She didn't look back. When she got home, she told her parents, and her dad insisted on picking her up from work for the rest of the break. She never saw the man again. But here's what Rachel told me that still makes my skin crawl. A few weeks later, in January, there was a news report about a man who'd been arrested for breaking into a woman's apartment. The woman worked at the same mall, just a few stores down from where Rachel had worked. The man had been stalking her for weeks, watching her shifts, following her home. He'd used a copy of her key. He'd taken it from her purse one day when she left it unattended in the break room. Rachel saw his mugshot on the news. It was the same man. She called the police and gave a statement, and they told her she was lucky. The man had a history of assault, and they found evidence in his apartment that he'd been planning to go after multiple women. Rachel's name was on a list. So was her address, her work schedule, and a photo of her car. She quit the job and didn't go back to that mall for years. She told me she still checks her rearview mirror obsessively when she drives, and she never parks in empty lots. She said the worst part wasn't to what happened. It was realizing how close she'd come to being another news story. The third story was told to me by a woman I worked with, Claire, who's now in her 50s. It happened when she was 12, in December of 1986, in a small town in upstate New York. Claire's family lived in an old farmhouse at the end of a long dirt road, surrounded by woods on 3 sides. Her parents were big on family traditions, and every Christmas Eve, they'd drive into town for church, then come home and open one present each before bed. That year, Claire's older brother, Danny, who was 16, had stayed home. He'd been sick with the flu for a few days, and their mom didn't want him out in the cold. Claire said she remembered feeling jealous that he got to stay home, but she didn't argue. Church lasted longer than usual that night. The priest gave a long sermon, and there were extra hymns. By the time they got home, it was almost 11 o'clock. The house was dark when they pulled up. Claire's dad commented on it, saying Danny must have gone to bed early, but when they walked inside, something felt wrong. The Christmas tree lights were off, which was strange because Danny always left them on. The house was cold, too colder than it should have been. Claire's mom called for Danny, but there was no answer. Her dad went upstairs to check his room, and Claire and her younger sister waited in the living room. A few seconds later, her dad came back down, his face pale. Danny wasn't in his room. His bed was made, his coat was still on the hook by the door, and his boots were by the stairs. Claire's mom started to panic, calling his name, checking every room, but he wasn't anywhere. Her dad grabbed a flashlight and went outside, and that's when Claire noticed something. The back door was open. Not wide open, just cracked a few inches, letting in the freezing December air. Claire walked over to it slowly, her stomach twisting, and she looked outside. The porch light was on, and she could see footprints in the snow leading away from the house toward the woods. She called for her dad, and he came running. He followed the footprints with the flashlight, shouting Danny's name, and Claire's mom stood at the door, crying. Claire and her sister were told to stay inside, but Claire watched from the window. Her dad's flashlight beam moved through the trees, getting smaller and smaller, until it disappeared completely. He was gone for almost 20 minutes. When he came back, he was alone, and his face looked wrong, shocked maybe, or scared. He didn't say anything at first, just picked up the phone and called the police. Claire's mom kept asking what happened, where Danny was, but her dad wouldn't answer. He just said, "He's not out there." The police arrived and searched the woods with dogs, but they didn't find Danny. They didn't find anything, no signs of a struggle, no blood, no tracks beyond the ones leading into the trees. It was like he'd walked into the woods and vanished. Danny came back 3 days later, on December 27th. Claire woke up that morning and found him sitting at the kitchen table, still wearing the same clothes he'd disappeared in. He was filthy, covered in dirt and scratches, and he wouldn't talk. Her parents took him to the hospital, and the doctor said he was dehydrated and hypothermic, but otherwise unharmed. When the police questioned him, Danny said he didn't remember anything. He said the last thing he remembered was watching TV on Christmas Eve, and then he woke up in the woods, not knowing how he got there or how much time had passed. Claire said her parents didn't push him, and after a while, everyone just stopped talking about it. But Claire knew something had happened. Danny wasn't the same after that. He barely spoke. He stopped going to school, and he'd wake up screaming in the middle of the night. A year later, when Claire was 13, she asked him about it. They were alone in the house, and she finally worked up the courage to say, "What really happened that night?" Danny looked at her for a long time, and then he said, "Something was in the house." Claire asked what he meant, but he wouldn't explain. He just said, "It wanted me to go outside. It kept calling me. And when I went out there, I saw it." Claire asked what it was, and Danny shook his head. He said, "I can't tell you. If I tell you, it'll come back." He never spoke about it again. Danny died in 2005, a car accident, and Claire said she never got the truth out of him. But she told me that every Christmas, she thinks about that night, and she wonders what her brother saw in those woods. She wonders if he really didn't remember, or if he just couldn't bring himself to say. And she wonders if it's still out there, waiting. The last story is mine, and it happened in 2012. I was 29, living alone in a small apartment in Oregon. It was a second-floor unit in an old building, the kind with thin walls and creaky floors. I'd been there for about 6 months, and I liked it. It was quiet, affordable, and close to work. That December, I was working late most nights, trying to finish a project before the holidays. I'd get home around 9 or 10, make dinner, and crash on the couch with my laptop. On December 18th, I got home around 9:30. The building was quiet, which was normal. Most of my neighbors were older, and they went to bed early. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and immediately felt like something was off. It wasn't anything obvious. The apartment looked the same, smelled the same, but there was a feeling in the air, like someone had just been there. I stood in the doorway for a minute, listening, but I didn't hear anything. I locked the door behind me and tried to shake it off. Over the next few days, the feeling got worse. I'd come home and find small things out of place: a chair pushed slightly away from the table, a drawer not quite closed all the way, my bedroom door open when I was sure I'd left it shut. I told myself I was just tired, that I was forgetting things, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. On December 21st, I came home and found my bathroom window open. It was one of those small windows, high up on the wall, with frosted glass. I never opened it, especially not in winter. I closed it and locked it, and I checked every other window and door in the apartment. Everything else was secure. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing soft creaks, like footsteps, and faint rustling, like fabric moving. I told myself it was the neighbors, but the sounds felt too close. The next morning, I called my landlord and told him I thought someone had been in my apartment. He said he'd checked the building, but he didn't seem concerned. He told me no one else had reported anything. On December 23rd, I set a trap. Before I left for work, I took a piece of tape and stuck it across the crack of my bedroom door, low down where it wouldn't be noticed. If someone opened the door, the tape would break. When I got home that night, the tape was broken. I stood in the hallway, staring at it, my hands shaking. I pulled out my phone and called the police. They came and searched the apartment, but they didn't find anyone. They didn't find signs of forced entry. No fingerprints, nothing. They told me to install a deadbolt and call if anything else happened. I didn't stay there that night. I packed a bag and went to a friend's house, and I didn't go back until the next day, December 24th. When I did, I brought my friend with me. We searched the entire apartment, checking every closet, every corner. And in my bedroom closet, behind a stack of boxes, we found something. A blanket. It wasn't mine. It was old, dirty, and it smelled like sweat and cigarettes. Underneath, it was an empty water bottle and a granola bar wrapper. Someone had been living in my closet. We called the police again, and this time they took it seriously. They dusted for prints and found partials on the closet door handle. They matched them to a man who'd been arrested a few years earlier for breaking and entering. He was never caught, though. I moved out a week later, and I didn't take anything from that apartment except my clothes. I left the furniture, the dishes, everything. I couldn't stand the thought of bringing anything with me, knowing he'd touched it. I still don't know how long he was there. Days? Weeks? I don't know what he was planning, or what he did while I was asleep. And I don't know how many nights he stood in my room, watching me, before I finally noticed. That's the part that haunts me the most. Not what happened, but what almost happened. What could have happened if I'd never put that tape on the door? This is Shadefall Tales, where every shadow hides a story and every story leaves a mark. If you made it to the end, you're braver than most. Subscribe if you dare to hear more tales from the darkness, because the next story might be closer to home than you think. Sweet dreams.